Heading up the news this morning, rock and roll singer Rick Nelson was killed last night in a private plane crash in Texas. Officials say that his charter DC-3 caught fire in flight and crashed while trying to make an emergency landing.
Ricky Nelson appeared to be living the dream. Popularity, wealth, and the adoration of countless fans. His life unfolded in front of cameras from the moment he stepped onto the stage, seamlessly combining music, television, and popularity in a manner that had never been witnessed before. What remained, however, when the last light went out, was completely at odds with global expectations. The events that unfolded next would cause shock and grief. Even after he stopped speaking, surprising revelations, hidden realities, and a fortune that overwhelmed even his closest friends and family would come to light. A legacy that would affect the way his tale was remembered, cause wars, and arouse emotions lay behind the sparkling image. Eric Hilliard Nelson, the man known as Ricky Nelson, came from an entertainment family in Teaneck, New Jersey. His prominent father, Azie Nelson, was a big band leader, and his famous mother, Harriet Hilliard, was an actress. There was never any normalcy in Ricky's life. At contrast to his peers, Ricky spent his formative years at radio stations, recording studios and on sound stages, rather than parks or calm family gatherings. The boundaries between the Nelsons' private and public life were increasingly blurry due to the fact that they were more than simply a family. They were a functioning entertainment unit. Even though Ricky was in nappies when it became famous, his parents' radio show, The Adventures of Azie and Harriet, was nationally syndicated. His formative years were so likely spent in a studio awash with screenplays, microphones, and the constant din of production. Professional child actors were chosen to portray Ricky and his elder brother David when the program premiered in 1944. But the two boys insisted on playing the parts themselves and managed to convince their parents to let them. Ricky became a well-known character before he even reached puberty. He was already a cast member by 1949. The Adventures of Azie and Harriet, in which Ricky was a young actor, brought Ricky's life to millions of American households weekly. Instead of having a typical upbringing, he spent his time practicing lines, recording episodes, and being under the bright lights of the set instead of attending birthday parties, participating in school activities, and playing sports. It was not uncommon for family dinners to double as script readings, and vacations would occasionally double as filming dates. The Cape Cod home at 1822 Camino Palmero Street in Los Angeles became famous as a result of its appearance on the show. Fans would even drive by simply to see the unique structure. Even though Ricky was lavished with money and adoration due to his early stardom, it also caused him grief. Because of his asthma, he spent much of his time indoors, away from his friends. Ricky sought refuge indoors, surrounded by music and literature, while his peers played outside. Even though he seemed shy at first, the aforementioned boy's outgoing demeanor became his secret weapon when performing. As a youngster, he often misunderstood what it meant to have a typical childhood, because stardom and attention began to follow him throughout his life when he was just 7 years old. Still, he had to pay a heavy price to rise above, and these two forces ultimately generated both great achievement and devastating tragedies during his childhood. A pivotal performance marked the beginning of Ricky Nelson's meteoric rise from kid actor to adolescent hero. At the tender age of 17, Ricky graced the adventures of Azie and Harriet in April 1957 with a rendition of I'm Walkin' by Fats Domino. It was a tense, thrilling time. His performance that one night attracted a massive audience, considering the show's weekly viewership of millions. The reaction was immediate. His calm stage presence and easy charisma enchanted teens all throughout the United States. After making an appearance on television, the song I'm Walkin' soared to number 4 on the Billboard chart, while the B-side, A Teenager's Romance, reached an even higher peak of number 2. There was a purpose behind this. Ozzie Nelson, Ricky's father, had shrewdly capitalized on the Nelson family's fame on television to establish Ricky as a musician. Unlike his contemporaries, Ricky already had a nationwide audience waiting for him when he applied for radio play. Each episode ended with a new song, which Ozzie made sure to play, giving the program a chance to advertise. Record labels quickly saw the value in Ricky's fame. 750,000 people pre-ordered his debut single Bebop Baby from Imperial Records before the album ever came out. More than 1 million copies were sold, and it peaked at number 5 on the pop and R&B charts, solidifying Ricky's position as a celebrity outside of television. At the year's end in Ricky's self-titled first album spent 2 weeks atop the Billboard album chart. As a result, Ricky became the youngest male artist in Billboard history to have an album debut at number 1. He became the newest adolescent idol in the United States, thanks to his cute, little, neat, and stereotypically American looks. Ricky quickly became the center of national obsession, and fan groups began to sprout up across. A testament to the breadth and depth of Ricky Nelson's fan base, the Ricky Nelson International Fan Club had 9,000 chapters by 1960. Between 1957 and 1962, he had 20 songs that reached the top 40, placing him second only to Elvis Presley at that time in his nearly meteoric rise to fame. His 1958 single, Poor Little Fool, was the first single to reach number 1 on the brand-new Billboard Hot 100 chart, forever cementing his place in music history. He had unprecedented creative power over his music and album graphics thanks to mind-numbing recording contracts that no other musician his age would have gotten. Ricky Nelson was more than simply a teen idol. He was a genuine trailblazer who showed the next generation how superstardom intersects with youth culture, television, and music. His father, Ozzie Nelson, had a firm grasp over Ricky Nelson's professional and personal life from the start of his career forward. In addition to supervising the writing and production of Azie and Harriet, Ozzie was also heavily involved in managing Ricky's reputation, professional choices, and financial situation as the show's producer. Ozzie maintained tight control over Ricky's finances even after he began making a substantial salary from his music, $500 per week when he was a teenager. While his father took care of everything else, Ricky just got a little allowance. Ozzie thought he had to keep his kid in line so he wouldn't grow up spoiled by his fame and money. Ozzie's overseeing extended much beyond monetary matters. Instead of performing on shows like The Ed Sullivan Show, he made sure Ricky would play new songs at the conclusion of television programs in order to maximize the family's brand. The Nelson family business was able to maintain its prominent position in this manner. Ricky's capacity to experiment and take chances was curbed by Azie's plan, which yielded constant chart hits because to the huge weekly TV viewership, Azie saw every public appearance, performance, and important choice through his protective and frequently dominating prism. All aspects of Ricky Nelson's life and fame, including his family and his business, merged into one seamless setting. The Nelson residence at 1822 Camino Palmero served as more than simply a place to live. It also served as a symbol of their impeccable public persona. On the inside, celebrations like birthdays and family feasts coexisted with business decisions, screenplay sessions, and rehearsals. Trips away from home might end up in the movies. Everyday occurrences could spark plot points for future episodes. Being a son, performer, and employee all in one made it almost hard to tell them apart. The more Ricky grew up, the more irritating that domineering grip became. Now that he was a successful musician in his own right, he quickly yearned for more freedom. He wanted to escape, and he did little things like growing his sideburns or dating women his family didn't approve of. It was difficult, since Azie had complete control over Ricky's reputation and income. Ricky found himself confined by the very combination of his professional and personal lives that had historically contributed to his family's prosperity. The truth behind Ricky Nelson's meticulously manicured image was rife with hidden relationships that, if his admirers had known, would have astonished them. In real life, Ricky was already managing relationships that challenged the bounds of what his parents and the public anticipated, even if he appeared on screen as the pleasant, all-American boy next door. The adventures of Azie and Harriet co-star Mary Ann Gaba, with whom he had an early and committed connection. They were romantically involved off-camera. Ricky said afterwards that they would neck for hours, a practice that was taboo in the 1950s. Even though it meant very little to Ricky, the gold ring he gave Mary Ann with the engraving, "To Mary Ann, love Rick," gave her the impression that they were serious about their relationship. Many young ladies were interested in Ricky because of his celebrity and charisma, and their relationships frequently overlapped. He began an affair with fellow musician Laurie Collins after his breakup with Mary Ann. While the world knew about their professional partnership as they started creating music together, no one knew about their love relationship. Ricky kept up his outward image as the innocent young idol, but he was actually living the high life as a celebrity. The worry of his parents, especially Azie and Harriet, was immense. Serious relationships, or even engagement rumors, were a source of concern for them since they may distract him from his work and harm the carefully cultivated family reputation. So disobedience manifested itself in several ways, including one's love life, personal style, and decisions. Little rebellions, like growing sideburns and starting to smooth back his hair, irritated his parents, who wished he would keep a respectable appearance. In a society where he felt controlled in almost every way, these adjustments showed that he was striving to assert his independence. So that Ricky wouldn't get spoiled, Azie hoarded his record sales and television appearance revenues and limited Ricky's access to them. As a result, Ricky's underlying dissatisfaction with his existence remained dormant. As Ricky's conquests piled up, his desperation to break free of his shackles only served to confuse matters. Fights broke out amongst him, with the stakes high, and his new teaching methods being a particular flashpoint. He began to gradually stray from his family's path in his interactions with others and musical preferences. Overall, Ricky's public persona kept becoming better, but he was really struggling to find a balance between his family's expectations and his desire for independence. Ricky Nelson had gone from being a mere adolescent hero to a top-charting music phenomenon by the late 1950s. Bebop Baby, his debut song for Imperial Records, achieved extraordinary success, selling over 1 million copies and garnering 750,000 pre-orders before to its release. Ricky, his debut album released in 1957, became the first album by a young musician to reach #1 on the Billboard album chart. Ricky continued to have success. From 1957 to 1962, he had 20 songs that were ranked in the top 40, second only to Elvis Presley at that time. When the Hot 100 chart debuted in 1958 on Billboard, songs like Poor Little Fool made history by achieving the first-ever #1. His versatility as a musician was demonstrated by the fact that his albums fused rockabilly, pop, and country. There was a strong correlation between Ricky's family's television business and his musical career. By including Ricky's performances of new songs into the closing credits of each episode of The Adventures of Azie and Harriet, Azie Nelson transformed the show into an effective advertising tool. With weekly airplay, Ricky's songs were bound to skyrocket in the charts. He had great success in cinema as well as music. Along with John Wayne and Dean Martin, Ricky was a star in the 1959 film Rio Bravo. His acting chops were on full display in his performance as Colorado Ryan, which garnered him a nomination for Most Promising Newcomer at the Golden Globes. Ricky embraced the Hollywood high life after becoming famous and wealthy. He was already getting bespoke clothes tailored, driving around in expensive automobiles, frequenting exclusive clubs, and socializing with A-list celebrities while he was in his late teens and early 20s. At one point, he reportedly got a monthly stipend of $5,000, which is over $50,000 today. He supposedly enjoyed the benefits of celebrity just as much as everyone else, since he was often photographed at the most elite settings. Cracks started to appear on Ricky's face as he was thrust into the limelight. His restlessness was fueled by the fast-paced fame, continual touring, and pressure to maintain a spotless image. Along with all the expenditure, he was also starting to long for greater creative autonomy. Despite being the most popular performer of his time, Ricky was beginning to feel the weight of expectation and the difficulties that came with trying to live up to his early reputation. He had risen to unprecedented heights thanks to his fame, but the next challenge would put everything to the test. Although Ricky Nelson had already established himself as one of the most prominent American musicians by the early 1960s, the advent of the Beatles and the British invasion in 1964 caused a sea change in the world of popular music. In February of that year, the Beatles won over a new generation of admirers with their legendary performance on The Ed Sullivan Show. Ricky was one of several well-established American musicians who had to adjust to the new taste when, by April 1964, the Beatles had occupied all 5 of the top slots on the Billboard Hot 100. In contrast to the modern, defiant vigor of British rock, the music that had propelled Ricky to fame seemed quaint and antiquated. Ricky strove to maintain rhythm, but the melodic ebb and flow had abruptly changed. His For You song from 1964 failed miserably to crack the top 40, in stark contrast to his succession of top 10 singles in the late 1950s. Those who had been enchanted by his slick persona and rockabilly music began to choose more gritty, edgy acts. Many of the session musicians Ricky collaborated with didn't really get rock and roll, which hampered his efforts to update his music, after some of the more senior musicians flat out refused to perform in the way Ricky desired. And after hearing someone declare, "Kid, this ain't music," Ricky was so determined to take the lead that he replaced them with younger, more visionary musicians. All of these things came together in 1969 to become the Stone Canyon Band, as Ricky attempted a comeback by fusing rock and country, a sound that was revolutionary for its day. The Eagles' Randy Meisner, who would go on to form the band, was one of the gifted players he brought in. The creative risk did not pay off in the end. Ricky played everywhere from large arenas to little bars and college campuses, but he rarely had any kind of crowd. Despite widespread acclaim, albums by Rick Sings Nelson and In Concert failed miserably at the box office. Regrettably, he gave up his popularity and financial security to pursue creative freedom. When Ricky performed a rock and roll revival act at Madison Square Garden in 1971 to Booze, featuring newer songs, it was perhaps the sharpest representation of all of this conflict. The incident really affected him, and he proceeded to compose Garden Party, which was maybe his final major single, reaching number 6 on the Billboard chart in 1972. Its core message, "You can't please everyone, so you've got to please yourself," mirrored the hardship he had endured in an attempt to maintain his relevance in a deteriorating music industry. The marriage of Ricky Nelson and Kristen Harmon started off like a Hollywood dream, but things quickly became ugly. Kristen was from a renowned family. Her father was football great Tom Harmon, and her mother was actress Elise Knox, and they met on Christmas Day 1961. Ricky was 21 years old, and Kristen was 16 years old. Young, stunning, and both brought up in the limelight, they appeared to be an ideal marriage on paper. Their nuptials on April 20th, 1963, were far from the fairy tale ceremony that had been planned. Because Kristen was expecting a child, her Catholic family wanted the wedding to be short and sweet. A big cause of friction right from the outset was money. Kristen had high expectations for her marriage because of her privileged upbringing. As a result of his need to satisfy others, Ricky attempted to fund a lavish lifestyle that included several houses, fancy clothing, costly automobiles, and exotic holidays. His singing career has been on the wane since the early 1960s, but the couple's extravagant spending was far more than his earnings. Because they were so sure that fame and fortune would eventually return, they persisted in spending lavishly. Ricky kept up with the ever-increasing costs by touring non-stop, but his relationship with Kristen grew increasingly distant as a result. Their glitzy existence concealed the underlying fragility of their relationship. The stresses of Ricky's job and his many absences from the marriage made Kristen unhappy. He felt even more confined by her desire that he remain at home and pursue acting full-time. After all, a tour would have prevented them from going more into debt. A string of arguments ensued, and the two parties involved began to emotionally withdraw from one another. There was a turning point in 1977. Kristen had locked Ricky out of their home and taken all of his possessions to a rented place when he returned from tour. To rub salt in the wound, Ricky found out that Kristen was having an affair with two Los Angeles Rams cheerleaders, which completely embarrassed him and proved that his marriage was hopelessly damaged. The subsequent divorce was contentious, lengthy, and costly. Battles in court dragged on for over 5 years, costing over $1 million in attorney expenses. They each accused each other of drug misuse and poor parenting, and their 4 children ended themselves in the middle of it all. After the divorce was finalized in 1982, Ricky was given joint custody of the children and required to pay $4,000 a month in child support. What started out as a Hollywood golden couple ended up financially and emotionally ruining Ricky and Kristen. Midway through the 1970s, Ricky Nelson's once promising career was on the decline, and his financial situation was a complete disaster. His wealth had been depleted by years of frivolous spending, the costs of his contentious divorce from Kristen Harmon, and his endeavors to maintain an extravagant lifestyle. Ricky was engrossed in debt despite his celebrity. He owed plenty of money for things like private education, expensive houses, and back taxes. Ricky was ordered by the court to pay $4,000 per month in child support after the 1982 finalization of his divorce, which cost more than $1 million in legal expenses alone. Ricky had to tour practically continuously to make ends meet. Instead of appearing in sold-out arenas, he played at smaller venues, amusement parks, and county fairs. Despite Ricky's sincere desire for creative independence, his attempts to reimagine his music career had no impact on his financial woes. In 1969, he assembled the Stone Canyon Band to fuse country and rock when no one else tried. The album was well received by critics, but did not sell well. Despite releasing albums like In Concert and Rick Sings Nelson at this time, Ricky never achieved the mainstream breakthrough he sorely craved. He had to pay the band's salary, equipment, and travel costs out of his own dwindling income, all because he took a creative risk. At Madison Square Garden on October 15, 1971, the turning point of this fight occurred. In an effort to reconnect with long-lost followers and showcase his more recent work, Ricky made an appearance at a rock and roll revival concert. His early hits were expected, but when he sang songs like Honky Tonk Women, the audience booed. Ricky was left feeling disturbed and disillusioned by the humiliating episode. But he wrote one of his most intimate and popular songs, Garden Party, about that traumatic event. It was released in 1972 and earned gold. The song peaked at number 6 on the Billboard Hot 100. "You can't please everyone, so you got to please yourself," is the iconic lyric that encapsulates the difficult lessons Ricky had to learn about stardom, expectations, and being yourself. For Ricky, the long haul, Garden Party did little to better his financial circumstances. His record label cut ties with him when his subsequent singles failed to achieve chart success. In an effort to keep himself afloat, he continued traveling wherever he could and took up little jobs on television. Although it was more of a farewell than a return, Ricky's garden party rebirth was brief. Indeed, he was essentially stuck in a never-ending cycle of debt repayment for the majority of his final years. Midway through the 1980s, Ricky Nelson was stymied by financial woes and yearning for a professional comeback. Even though he was terrified of flying, he chose not to use a tour bus because touring had become his sole steady source of income. With the hopes of enjoying some peace and quiet and cutting down on travel expenses, he spent $118,000 in 1985 on a vintage 1944 Douglas DC-3 plane. There was a checkered mechanical past for the plane that Jerry Lee Lewis originally owned. Many in Ricky's band and crew were apprehensive about taking to the skies in it due to its faulty engines and frequent breakdowns. Due to the inability to cancel engagements, Ricky persisted in using the plane despite its history of technical problems, which resulted in lost shows and emergency landings. For their 1985 New Year's Eve performance in Dallas, Ricky and his band boarded the DC-3 on December 31st. Another technical issue caused the aircraft to be delayed for hours. However, they were desperate to make it to the concert, so they ultimately took off. A catastrophe occurred in Texas. The pilots had a hard time keeping the plane under control as dense black smoke filled the cabin. The primary pilot, Brad Rank, had to poke his head out the window in an attempt to steer due to the extremely low visibility. The jet went down in a field about 2 miles from the runway after crashing into some trees in DeKalb, Texas, at around 5:14 p.m. Over 150 yards of debris was scattered when the plane went up in flames. In addition to Ricky and his fiancée Helen Blair, the 7-person traveling party included 5 members of Ricky's band and crew: pianist Andy Chapin, drummer Rick Intveld, guitarist Bobby Neal, bassist Patrick Woodward, and sound technician Donald Clark Russell. Tragically, none of these individuals survived the catastrophe. The 2 pilots somehow made it out of the plane alive by using the windows in the cockpit. Authorities had to conduct autopsy on the victims to establish names because the scene was so horrific. Tragically, Ricky's family and his followers were rocked by this shocking tragedy, which stunned the music industry. A beloved American figure who was only 45 years old when he passed away was only hours before 1986 began. The incident was most likely caused by maintenance issues or mechanical breakdowns, according to investigations. The tragedy took Ricky's life, but it also set in motion a 15-year legal battle in which victims' relatives sued Ricky Nelson's estate for wrongful death. Further issues arose in the estate's financial matters. The accident became a metaphor for the heavy emotional and financial toll Ricky had to take in his latter years as he battled to maintain his family, his job, and some semblance of stability amidst an extraordinarily up-and-down life. It became public knowledge following Ricky Nelson's untimely demise in 1985 that his financial situation was chaotic. His estate reportedly owed more than $1 million after years of extravagant spending, divorce-related legal fees, and the exorbitant maintenance costs of the antique DC-3 jet that he died in. Despite his career of successful albums and television stardom, the absence of a will seemed to be the first sign that Ricky had passed away. Kristen Harmon, his ex-wife, acted swiftly to seize the estate, stating that she was unable to find any necessary paperwork. However, shockingly, David Nelson, Ricky's brother, presented a legitimate will that was dated only 4 months before to the disaster. All of Ricky's assets were bequeathed to his 4 children, Tracy, Gunnar, Dipsar, Matthew, and Sam Nelson, by his last testament, which appointed David executor. A contentious legal struggle began with the unveiling of the will. Despite the fact that they were divorced, Kristen disregarded David's position as executor and attempted to collect on some of Ricky's life insurance. On the other hand, another issue surfaced. Ricky's son, Eric Jude Crew, who was born during a short relationship he had with Georgianne Crew in 1980. In spite of the fact that a blood test ordered by the court had established Ricky's fatherhood in 1981, Eric was specifically left out of his will due to the fact that paternity was questioned. The court affirmed Ricky's will, leaving Eric with nothing, despite Georgianne's efforts to get a portion of the fortune for her son. Protracted court fights ensued as creditors, relatives, and attorneys all competed for Ricky's little assets. Most people didn't realize it at the time, but Ricky's legacy was not in his estate or riches, but in his song catalog and royalties. But record labels had conspired for decades to pay the Nelson estate substantially less than what was owed through questionable deductions and antiquated accounting practices. The estate sued Capitol Records in 2011, claiming the label had hidden millions in unmatched income and had wrongly applied deductions for digital sales to conventional media. The unpaid royalties requested in the lawsuit ranged from $100 million to $250 million. Capitol Records paid a sum not revealed in 2014 to settle charges and pledged to be more transparent in their reporting as part of the settlement. In 2020, conflict took a different path. After deciding to sue Sony Music for grossly underpaying worldwide streaming royalties due to excessive intercompany fees, the Nelson estate received an extra $12.7 million and a 36% boost to their future streaming royalties as part of a historic settlement. Thanks to these successes, Ricky's children could start getting their hands on the money their dad worked so hard to obtain. I appreciate you tuning in. If you found this in-depth look into Ricky Nelson's life fascinating, then like, comment, and subscribe for more undiscovered tales of music greats. Continue your trip by clicking on the next video that appears on your screen.